To increase awareness about the benefits and process of conducting prescribed fires that keep our forest healthy, and more importantly, help protect people and property, ADQ is committed to working with the community and our state and federal partners. Watch this video of a hybrid community meeting we hosted with the Arizona Department of Forestry and Fire Management and the United States Department of Agriculture, United States Forest Service, in Camp Verde to hear what community members want to know and how we all work together.
It's good to be here tonight. Thanks for coming, and I'm with the Department of Forestry and Fire Management. So go ahead. Yeah, the Department of Forestry and Fire Management provides fire protection to about 22 million acres statewide of private and state trust lands, and that is according to Arizona statute. Now, with that protecting that resource and public safety is the fact that prescribed fire plays a big role in that, and the reduction of fuels, hazard fuels. So the divisions of the Department of Forestry and Fire Management include fire, forestry, and also the Office of the State Fire Marshal. Now, you'll see on this slide that there's a triangle up there, and when it comes to fire and prescribed fire particularly, we're balancing some very complex elements, and trying to simplify that is a little bit dicey. Here in Arizona, if you would take and put a dollar sign right in the middle of that triangle, that has a lot to do with what we can get done and how it's funded from all state and federal levels. So I would like to spend just a moment on the topography side of this triangle. Arizona is unique in and of the fact that the Mogollon Rim runs right through the middle of it. And because of that, it runs from Ash Fork almost to Silver City, New Mexico. That said, if you like Flagstaff and you go any cardinal direction from Flagstaff, Arizona, I don't care which direction you want to go, you're going to end up in a desert. And if you end up in a desert, that's probably the slowest decay rate there is due to moisture and those kind of things. So on the Mogollon Rim, that may be the second slowest decay rate. So what do you do with organic material in the largest contiguous ponderosa pine forest in the world? Also, part of the decree of managing that forest and managing Arizona's resources is that is the second highest lightning occurrence activity area in the United States, second only to Florida. So as you keep these kind of things in mind, topography in Arizona has a lot to do with how we handle the fuels. Now, in Arizona, there's a saying that only newcomers or fools predict weather in Arizona. And I can tell you that it's very, very difficult. Weather is a challenge, and it's ever changing. There is a reason, and I plant this seed in your mind, that they call this the arid Southwest. It is dry here. Okay, next slide. In order to make a difference for healthier forests and safer communities, DFFM is tasked with fuels mitigation and protecting communities, improving forest health on private and state and federal lands. Now, that fuels mitigation is conducted through a variety of activities. Some of it's mechanical, some of it's cutting, some of it's piling, some of it is mastication, and then when it comes right down to it, some of it has to do with smoke, because then it necessarily requires some form of burning or incineration. Prescribed fire involves both pile burning and what we call broadcast burning, which is an underburn. And one of the reasons that we pile material is because it increases the combustion efficiency. And when combustion efficiency is high, smoke production is a little lower. Okay, next slide. What we're trying to do is we're trying to partner with the other state agencies, federal and tribal land management agencies to help us strategically place these fuel treatments across the landscape in the right place, the right location, right time. So the benefits that result from this is, first and foremost, a safer environment for our firefighters and first responders. That's key. That's essential. We know we're going to have wildfires with that's well documented. We want to reduce the risk to our communities, wildfire risk, and protect the infrastructure that services these communities, like our power lines and the watersheds. One thing about Arizona is water is like gold. It becomes a critical resource. We want to improve the health of Arizona's forests by reducing this dead and dying vegetation and diseased trees. And by doing so, we also recognize that it enhances soil production nutrients at the same time. Next slide. Okay, so from the smoke management standpoint, weather is a wild card. And it plays a critical role in the timing. And we here just recently haven't had any problem with too high of fuel moistures. It's pretty dry. And we could go about anywhere in the state of Arizona today, tomorrow, and maybe until December and conduct prescribed fire operations. We work with ADEQ to ensure that we do what we can to watch the weather and limit as much as possible the smoke impacts, especially if we have, based on weather, cooler temperatures has a lot to do with the way smoke travels the landscape. And if you want to know how smoke will travel when it's cool up on the Mogollon Rim, all you got to do is follow the river. And it comes down at night, goes up during the day. Okay. ADEQ approves our plans to burn, and they monitor our ignitions. It's all about cooperation, communication, and coordination. That helps us be efficient and necessarily points us towards achieving these safer and healthier communities and landscapes for the future. There have been some recent strides made and commitments where we've got a program that we're trying to embrace from all agencies called the Good Neighbor Authority. And that Good Neighbor Authority, what that does is that allows us to work together in ways that we haven't been able to work together before. And so, for instance, if the Forest Service and state trust land are adjacent, fire doesn't know where the boundary is. And we can conduct those prescribed fires across those boundaries easier today than we ever have been able to. So with that, I'll pass the baton to Ron.
So my name is Ron Sharon. I'm the Regional Smoke Coordinator with Southwest Region 3 for the U.S. Forest Service. I've been doing this role now for a little over 20 years. My original background, I was an air quality specialist and an environmental justice advocate, grassroots activist for indigenous environmental rights. I did a lot of grassroots stuff for tribes in Oklahoma and indigenous people in Asia. I actually did a trip over to Taiwan to help out some indigenous people over there. So I kind of have a little different background. So 20 years ago, I came over and I took a position in smoke management as the assistant coordinator for the Arizona Interagency Smoke Management Program. When I got into that, I had the background in environmental. I had the air quality background. I just didn't have the fire background. So my boss at that time and my mentor, and now works out at Washington office, Pete Long, he wanted me to get involved in fire as much as possible. Because he said that was one of the things where you couldn't understand smoke until you knew fire. So he'd sent me out, got me red carded, sent me to a bunch of different trainings. But the one thing that sticks in my mind the most about that 20 years ago was he sent me to the National Wildfire Conference. It was a week-long meeting where they bring in academia, they bring in all the research, the recent research, they bring in the boots on the ground, they bring in policymakers, they bring them all together and they talk about the current status of our fuels, the current status of wildland fire. So the one thing that stuck in my mind the most from that meeting is one of the keynote speakers that spoke at the end. He was a fire ecologist. So he got up to end the meeting and he came up and gave us a pretty grim outlook. And in that presentation, he said, by the year 2050, mega fires won't be 10 to 100,000 acres. They'll be 1 million acres. Said by the year 2050, the Sonoran Desert will be dead. The desert will shift north. Behind it, a savanna-like grassland will fill in. He said by the year 2050, in the Midwest, we'll see commonplace 100,000 acre wildfires. At that time, 2004, that was unheard of because of the lighter fuels, the grass, the county roads, the fences. You had all these natural fuel breaks and man-made fuel breaks all across the Midwest. And the fires just weren't that active that they could spread. And he said by the year 2050, we won't be chasing fire. Wildfires will be chasing us. So that was in 2004. It's 2024 now. We've already had multiple 1 million acre wildfires. 2024, a couple years ago, we had a wildfire in the Midwest that stretched from Texas to Kansas. 2024, we see the desert dying off. We see the fires constantly, over and over in the desert floor. And everybody, if you're around a television, you saw those pictures from the Paradise Fire with all those cars burnt over on the road. There was also fires in Washington where the fires ran faster than the emergency responders could evacuate towns. And we are almost halfway to 2050. And we've seen all of that come to fruition already. So that being said, and keeping that in mind, we realized we have to do something. That we were behind the curve. That we had to come put something together in a way that we could try to make a dent in this. So in 2022, the Forest Service came and they launched a 10-year strategy. You'll hear a lot of people call this the Wildfire Crisis Strategy, WCS. This was our roadmap. This is our plan to try to start catching up to the fuels, to try to get back. What we did was we went and took all the best available science. We took the best available resources. We got together with our partners and we built new partnerships. And we came together to figure out how we would address this. How could we make a dent on this? So we combined years of scientific research, planning, And then on top of that, we threw a historic congressional funding. Previously, it kind of seemed like we were more project specific. We worked with what available funding was available, what available resources were available. We were constantly working with what was available at the time. And then we still had to deal with the weather. Everything still had to line up. So we just weren't making a dent. And I always have to make a jab at meteorologists anytime I talk, especially that I know some of them are online. I used to sit in a cube at DDQ, and I tell everybody all the time, I would come out of my car at the parking structure. I'd go get an elevator. I'd get up to the cube with all the meteorologists. I'd have raindrops on my eyeglasses, and my shirt would be wet. And I'd tell the guys, hey guys, it's raining outside. Not one of them would go look out the window. They'd all get on their computer to see if I was lying or not. So, Brad, Joe, that was for you. But that was, I always have to make the jab. But kidding aside, everything has to line up. And if we're going at what's available, our wildfire seasons are stretching further into things. We're going to always be missing something there. So back to the strategy. This is a 10-year plan. This is the roadmap to get us to make a dent into this and start making a little bit of a difference. So the big thing with the 10-year strategy was the goal to up the scale and pace. We have to up what we're doing. We have to up the acres. We have to get those acres faster. We have to get through the planning faster. We have to get those hurdles out of the way. So our goal with this 10-year strategy is in 10 years, we'll treat 20 million acres on Forest Service lands. And we'll help treat 30 million on our partners on non-Forest Service lands. Now, that's not all prescribed fire. That's mechanical, that's using wildfire and prescribed fire. But these are the acres we're looking at. And we're going to work with all these partners. Roy touched on it a little bit. There's big funding coming in, and then the collaboration with our neighbors. Our other having funding agreements in place where our partners, our federal partners, our tribal partners, our state partners, working with industry, working with the non-government organizations to work to get this. It's really a change in the paradigm of what we've seen and what we've done in the past. So a big part of this is going back to that science, pulling all that available information, getting all the academy, the academia people together. So first we needed to know, we knew there was a problem, but where's the problem at? How do we apply the problem? Where do we implement? How do we start? How do we get there? So we took all the best available science we had, and that allowed us to run over 79 million simulations, wildfire simulations, where they dropped that starting in different places with the current weather, current fuel types, everything there, and let it run out to see where those fires would go. And from all those simulations, they were able to map out all these fire sheds, all these areas that put communities at risk. Not just communities, infrastructure, our national security risks, power grids, water supplies. So it pulled all this stuff together and it came up with 250 top priority fire sheds. So now we knew the areas that needed to be treated first, but we had to figure out how are we going to treat them? How are we going to get in there? So as part of implementing the plan, the part of getting this up to the scale and pace that we needed to keep up with the fire risk, they took all these fire sheds and then they started looking for projects that were at the scale that could make a dent or could easily be built out to the scale where they could be helpful. They had to be projects that were outcome driven. By getting in there and treating those acres, there had to be a direct outcome that we wanted to see from that. We had to keep in mind, this was the environmental justice side, so this kind of brought me into this too, is to allow for the investment in underserved communities. That was the portion that was brought into it. And we had to develop this in communities that were ready for it. Communities that understood that they were at risk, and they understood that we would have to put smoke in there, that we would have to do mechanical treatment, that we would have to use fire when fire was started. And then on top of that, these had to be have areas that already had partnerships built, or could easily build a partnership that we could leverage that partnership to help get these projects done. Because remember, we got a 10-year timeline that we put on this plan. And then we didn't want to have to wait on Congress or anybody to build any additional authorities. So we had to go back and look at where there are authorities already in place that allowed for funding. Where were projects that already were utilizing some of these authorities, and how could we leverage all that and bring it together? So out of these 250 fire sheds, top priority, there were 29 candidates that went in, that put in for the initial investment. Of the 29, only 10 were selected. And of those 10, in fiscal year 22, 2 of them were right here in Arizona. The 4FRI, that's the Forest Restoration Initiative, and the Prescott. So I'll jump in. So a lot of you guys in this area have seen smoke, smelled smoke, watched smoke, dealt with it in some way or another. I'm sure you've heard of the Forest Restoration Initiative. This is a collaborative project between the Kaibab, Coconino, Apache Sitgraves, Cono National Forest, and the state of Arizona, with 2.4 million acres, with initial treatments expected to be finished by 2042. That's the initial investment and the initial treatments that'll go through. That's not the maintenance, that stuff comes after. That's a follow-up to this. And then you see the list of partners there. The Greater Prescott Area Wildfire Protection and Restoration is the Prescott National Forest, 400 acres, expected, the initial treatments expected by 2032, and then you see the list of partners. And then in fiscal year 23, using one of those authorities, those authorizations, the Tropical Forest Protection Act, we added a third one to the state of Arizona. And that's a collaboration between San Carlos Apache, the Tano, the Apache Sitgraves, and the Coronado. 3 million acres. And they're expected to treat 87,000 acres by 2027. So what is the priority landscape? What is the national priority landscape? It's kind of bigger just than a title. It encompasses this plan. It encompasses this strategy, and it encompasses all of the science that's come together, all of the resources that have come together, all of this that's come together for us to give us a chance to change that paradigm, for us to get in and affect these areas that are fire.
Thank you, Ron. Good evening, everyone. My name is Brody Droppelman. I'm an air quality meteorologist with ADEQ, and I'm going to be going over the smoke management program, which entails prescribed burn request reviewing, and also I'm going to be going over some smoke forecasting as well. But what really gels everything together in smoke management is the coordination that we have with the forest. We have really good coordination with those guys, and they do a really good job getting back to us, getting us the information that we need whenever they want to get these projects in. These projects take a long time for development, and so they give us a pretty good heads up what they're planning on doing well in advance. So even before we get a prescribed burn request to come in, we're talking with the forest, and coordination goes throughout the entire process, through the prescribed burn process, and then even after when they're out there and doing their burning. But this is part of the smoke rules, are protecting forest range management burns. So part of ADEQ and the smoke management program, review burn plans and examine burn requests. So that's going to be the smoke forecasting. Based on the forecasting, we'll have the approvals, disapprovals, or conditionally approving burn requests. So that's all going to be dictate what we think the weather is going to do, how that dictates what the smoke behavior is going to be. And then lastly, collecting complement data and tracking emissions. So the forest, what they do, they give us what these called emission reduction techniques. They give us these strategies that they do in order to go out there get these prescribed burns done safely and also reducing emissions. ADEQ, we're the only agency in the country that does this, emission reduction techniques. So, you know, it goes to show how important the smoke management program is, and then also just for ADEQ itself with the kind of the mission of reducing emissions. And then also just kind of as a side note with Article 15, the latest smoke rule has been submitted for revised to the EPA, and that is now pending. But so specifically for ADQ in the burn rule, there are 11 criteria that we have to do for each prescribed burn. So it was a little small, hard to read on the right, so I did summarize it into 4 main focal points. First one, analysis of emissions from ongoing prescribed burns or wildfires, so I kind of touched on that. We're always assessing smoke impacts, and we're also getting that emissions data that we get from the forest. The second thing, so that's analysis of local burn conditions. Again, that's the smoke forecast. I'm going to be getting into that in the next slide, kind of how we do the smoke forecasting, what the meteorology does and how that affects smoke. Assessment duration of intensity smoke emissions. This also includes wildfires. Whenever you get a wildfire, if we need to go out and do monitoring, or if we need to make a smoke forecast for it, we will do so. And then lastly, is protection of Class 1 areas and the national air quality standards. So Class 1 areas, these are designated by the EPA that they need special protection from any adverse air quality. So these are going to be like your national parks, like the Grand Canyon. Also, there are many wilderness areas in the state of Arizona, so we have to protect those as well. And the national air quality standards, that's going to be linked to limiting smoke impacts for people and sensitive areas like roads, cities, and whatnot. And main thing with the word protection is that, you know, our job here is to limit smoke impacts. We cannot eliminate smoke altogether when there's fire on the ground. So we do that coordination with the burners. We use the meteorology so that we can limit the smoke impacts as much as possible to any sensitive areas, just like cities and roads, and then of course Class 1 areas. So let's say we get a burn request in, and we get all the information that we need from the forest. If we do need more information from them, we don't hesitate to call, get some more information from them throughout this process. But say we're ready to go to review a prescribed burn request. So this is where we start our forecasting. And what we do, we have a team of meteorologists that go through these. And really what we're doing is making your typical weather forecast. So we utilize weather models. We're trained to diagnose what the models say, but we're expecting models to when it comes to smoke behavior. We also use satellite imagery, look at prior days. Of course, if there's already smoke in the air, we have to take that into account, of course, whenever we're going into the future. We also have what we call air particle trajectories. So these are kind of wind models. They give you an idea of where they're expecting particles or emissions to go to based on the winds. And we also see, you can see there's a couple of different colors that shows the different heights, because wind changes with height as well, in direction and with magnitude. Current air quality data. So we have some monitors out there that gives us kind of the best up-to-speed data. We'll go into that as well in the next presentation when it comes to monitors and sensors. Upper air data. So this image here is a SKU-T. This gives us kind of a cross-section of the atmosphere. It gives us temperature, it gives us winds, and this will really show kind of how smoke is going to behave for that particular day. Because temperature can change how smoke moves. Winds, of course, can change how smoke moves. And so the main thing when it comes to daytime and overnight, smoke behaves differently between the day and the night, depending on if there are winds present overnight or not. But in the daytime, you can expect smoke to kind of rise and then kind of disperse with the prevailing winds. When you have that heat on the ground, the smoke will rise. At night, smoke acts more like a fluid. It will kind of settle down as the surface cools. It will go into low-lying areas and it will drain down slope, kind of like water does. So to kind of help us bolster our forecasting, what we're expecting smoke to do overnight, we also use smoke models. So they do look a little aggressive on here, but that's really just a byproduct of the model itself. But you can see in the upper left one that you have a lot of smoke, those kind of little points, those particles. They're really following those drainages. So we also look at topo maps to kind of get an idea of the local topography, because that's why it's so important whenever we get burn requests in from the forest. They give us the exact location, their approximate location where they're going to burn. And so we can look at the local topography and see how smoke might behave overnight, depending on overnight conditions. And so after we go through our forecasts and we get a pretty good idea of what we're expecting smoke to do, That's when we go to the burn decision process. That's either approving, disapproving, or conditional approving. And so if we're looking at the smoke and we're expecting, we're expecting heavier impacts to certain areas, this is where the coordination comes back. We'll go back up to the force and say, hey, we're seeing this, let's say there's this burn is similarly close to, let's say, Camp Verde, since where we are. This Camp Verde is in a valley. You guys tend to see smoke kind of drain down from bigger projects if that smoke gets down overnight. And so what we do is what's called a conditional approval. We will work with the forest to define a resolution so that they can still get their projects done safely and to get the reduction of emissions, which is a lot better than just getting a wildfire and put a whole bunch of smoke out there. But also we will restrict their timing on how they burn, or maybe we'll have them showing up their acres or showing up their perimeter where they're expecting to burn. This is all to mitigate smoke impacts. This is going to be for really the sensitive areas, with towns, we want to make sure that we limit those smoke impacts for the people. But this is what our homepage looks like for our smoke website. So you can visit the link there, and this is going to show you all the approved for daily burns. You can also change the date. You can go back in time to find other approvals that we have. And then also what we try to do every day, most of the time, we're going to have these the next day's approvals ready to go, no later than 3 p.m. So if you want to see the latest update for what is approved for tomorrow, you can check in at 3 p.m. and you're going to see them down here. If there are conditions on the burn, like I said, you're going to find them up here. So you can see notice of burns approved on Tuesday. That's kind of an example of what you might expect to see that we are watching. That we're going to be watching the smoke impacts. The forest understands what we're looking at. And then you have a map up here. You can see the approximate location of where these burns are going to be. So very useful site to know, what the forests are doing and what prescribed burns are happening right now. And so here's a bar chart of average prescribed fire acres per year. And you can see we have quite a peak in October and November. And again, the whole reason why we see more acres in the fall, it's all using meteorology. It all comes down to the climate. We can best utilize the weather so we can mitigate those smoke impacts for the people. But you can see, as Roy touched on it, we have a lot of broadcast burning in the fall, and then pretty steady still into the winter. There's gonna be a lot of your piles, and then steady into the spring. So maybe some more broadcast, some more pile in there, and then not a whole lot going on in the summer. Of course, they'll probably be looking at wildfires at that time. And so, let's say a prescribed burn has been approved, and now we are on the day of ignition, is what they're expecting. It may be a new day, and we may have new prescribed burn requests come in, but we are still, as meteorologists, even from out in our office in Phoenix, we are keeping an eye on all these burn projects to see how things are going. And when there's a whole bunch of tools that we have at our disposal, so we can see what the smoke's doing. So satellite imagery, like I said previously, satellite imagery is really good these days. We can pick up hot spots. We can see smoke pretty easily, depending on the size of the project. And we also have cameras that are situated across the state. They're really good as well. And then the last thing that we have for more surface observations to see any smoke impacts near the ground are going to be monitors and sensors. But the thing with monitors and sensors, they are pretty unique. They all have their own little quirks. They can be very confusing to read and interpret. And with that, I'm going to now hand it over to Dr. Matt Pace to talk about monitors and sensors. Thank you so much.
Good evening, everyone. Like Brady mentioned, one of the parts of smoke management, and I can't stress enough, coordination. It was on Brody's slide. We've all talked about it. And we've got air quality sensors, we've got monitors we can use, we've got satellite, we've got the webcams out there. But the relationships that we have built, ADQ with the Forest Service, with BIA, with BLM, with DFFM, is incredible. And believe it or not, there's a burner in this room, Aaron Grazer, I'm gonna point him out. He will send me pictures from his burn. Roy Paul will send me pictures from his burn to show you exactly what the smoke is doing. Not only during the good time, when smoke's lifting out, moving out, but the next morning, I get pictures of exactly what it looks like. So we built that great relationship with the community that they're actually sending the regulators what their smoke is doing. And that just showed you the coordination that we've built and the great job that the forests have been doing, all the different agencies in ADQ to build that relationship. But again, this is all about air quality sensors and monitors.
We've all seen them. Probably you've gone online. You may get the notifications on your phone. Hey, there's high air quality alert today. That's all coming from monitors. But there's a big difference, and I don't know if the people online can see, but we actually brought one of our monitors. This is a portable particulate monitor that we can put out in certain areas. If we deem it necessary to put one out there, we'll get there in a second. And then we have, this is an example of one. There's a lot of different types of these, but this particular one's a purple air sensor. So you can go buy one of these for $100, $200 or so, and set it out in your backyard, and it's going to read a value for you, potentially real time. That's going to give you an hourly average. But there's a big difference between these different types of monitors that you have out there, and it's important that you understand the difference, because what you'll learn is these are great for understanding that if there's smoke in an area, they're great indicators of smoke, but you can't necessarily trust the data all that well. This is literally a PVC cap with a monitor in the bottom. Again, there's not a lot of QC that happens. So there's a chart here that the EPA created to show you the difference of a monitor versus sensor. So we're going to call that a monitor, this guy a sensor, the ones that you can just go buy on Amazon, anywhere you can go get them. Big price difference, obviously a huge price difference there. Generally, when something is less expensive, what does everyone say? You get what you pay for. That's kind of applies here as well. Operating expenses, those are fairly expensive. You have to have trained people to service them, to calibrate them. These, you literally buy it, set it out there. There's no calibration whatsoever. You don't really know how well it's doing compared to other monitors. Siting locations. These are more fixed. They are able to be moved around, but they do need a power source. These ones, you can kind of just plug them in wherever you have a Wi-Fi or wherever you want to go. Staff training, again, like I mentioned, but really it's this key, the data quality part. One of the big things with federally referenced monitors, with these portable EBAMs, is there's consistent quality in varying conditions. So we know we can put that out at different elevations, at different humidities. We know the data that it's going to get us back is probably high quality data. These sensors, and again, there's all different types of these kind of sensors, they all completely vary. The EPA has done a ton of studies. Air Quality Division in Southern California has done a ton of studies of looking at the accuracy of these. And they've all come up with different methodologies to correct the data that's coming out of these at varying different temperatures, at varying different humidities, at varying different concentrations. So that's one of the things with these low-cost sensors. They're great indicators of smoke, comparing one day to the next, but the exact concentrations, not exactly the most reliable thing to use. So again, as long as you understand them, again, great indicators of smoke out there, but not necessarily good for exact concentration. Same thing with lifespans. Those can last 10 plus years. These, again, they all vary based on the conditions that they're out in. This, again, is a plastic cap. Who's left PVC out in the sun in the summer for about 2 hours? It'll turn completely black and basically start breaking. So again, these things, again, just use those with a word of caution when you are looking at these. Again, I love it. I love data. I'm a meteorologist. As Ron mentioned, you can tell if there's smoke out there, but we won't believe you until we actually see it on the computer screen. So I love data. So we have portable monitors like we have right set up here. You can come look at this if you want to afterwards, or if you're online, maybe we can show some pictures on social media and fun things like that. We could go through it. But we have semi-permanent monitors around the state. There's no regulatory monitors up in northern Arizona, but we do have these monitors sitting right here in Flagstaff, Prescott, Sedona. There's one actually in Camp Verde, just down by the river. And then we have one over in Sholo and one in Payson. So those are semi-permanent monitors that we have up there. Again, high population centers, generally where you are going to start seeing smoke drain, but they can move around. We can move these based on the need. Here's an example of one. When the West Fire was happening, we put one over in Pine. We forecasted that smoke was going to drain through. We wanted the community to know what smoke was there. We knew it was going to be a longer term impact, so we were able to put a monitor there. Obviously, we don't have an unlimited number of monitors. They're very expensive. They're expensive to run. So we do have to use the coordination that we have with where burns are going to be, the weather that's coming up, the smoke models, to figure out the best placement to reach the most number of people that makes the most sense. And I'll get into that a little bit more here in a second. So how do we determine where they go? Just like Brody said, we use smoke bottles. We can see where that smoke's going to drain. Now, if you live here in Arizona anytime, and I think Roy said it, Brody said it, what happens at night? That that smoke follows the drainages. It's no big shock. If you ever want to surprise yourself, it follows the cold air. If you're on a nice hilly road, stick your arm out the window, and what do you notice? You go down in elevation, your arm gets really cold, you go back up the other side of the wash and it gets warm. That's what us meteorologists do as well. That's how you always tell a meteorologist as they're driving around, believe it or not. You think I joke? So we use photography, we use topo maps to see exactly where that smoke's draining. Hydrology and smoke really go hand in hand overnight. So let's look at the Verde Valley and let's think about things here. So here's the Verde Valley, just to orientate yourself. We're sitting over here about right now. Here's Cottonwood, you have Sycamore that drains in, you have Oak Creek Canyon that drains in. You have West Clear Creek that drains, everything drains into Camp Verde. Can we put a monitor in every single location in Camp Verde or the whole Verde Valley? Anyone? No, it's not feasible. Would we like to have a monitor in every single block? Yeah, it would be great. You'd see exactly where everything's going. Unfortunately, it's just not feasible. It's not practical to do that. So how do we determine where we're going to put a monitor? Well, last October, we had 3 monitors in the Verde Valley itself. And how did we choose these locations? Well, you look here, again, smoke follows drainages. Here's a big drainage, here's a drainage, here's a drainage, and then there's another drainage over here that you can't see, and there's 1,000 other drainages. But what you'll notice is this one right here captures all the smoke that drains in from Oak Creek. This one here captured all the smoke coming down to East Verde, Sycamore. And then Camp Verde, the bottom of where it all comes together, you're going to capture that smoke there. So even though we can't have a monitor in absolutely every location, and obviously there's going to be varying difference of smoke in each location, but we can capture the majority of the smoke by placing monitors in very strategic locations. Generally, again, in the lower level areas, so we get a good picture of the smoke that you are experiencing in the Verde Valley. And we do this in all locations. And we do this in coordination as well with other agencies that are burning. So we understand what their projects are coming up. So we can put a monitor here and we can put conditions on burns. In fact, we were just talking before the meeting with Aaron again, and there were a lot of conditions on his burns last year based on these monitors and what they are reading. Again, those monitors, we use these for indicators, but we can't put conditions on burns based on these because, again, it goes back to the quality of the data. So here's what the monitors will show you. You can go on that fancyviz.net site and you'll see graphs that look like this. It's hourly graphs. This is hourly averages that you're seeing, the concentrations of smoke. Zeroes down at the bottom, that would absolutely be no smoke whatsoever. And the higher you go, the higher the smoke. Now, one thing that you have to know is the EPA is the one that sets standards. They set the air quality standards. The PM 2.5, which is smoke standard, is a 24-hour average from midnight to midnight. That's your 24-hour average. So use all of these hourly averages and you average that together and you get one number. If you are over 35.5, you have exceeded for the day. If you are under that, you have not exceeded. So even though you have values here, you'll see in the morning hours, big values, just like Brody was talking about, smoke drains in at night. When it heats up, what happens? That smoke starts to lift off the ground. So you might see some decent smoke impacts during the morning hours. You should limit your outdoor activity. It heats up, that smoke concentration drops. So you can see your 24-hour average is actually well below the standard. So it's one thing just to keep in mind when you are looking at smoke, you can have some higher impacts and you should limit your outdoor activity, but you have not exceeded the 24-hour standards that the EPA has put into place. And those are all health-based standards. It's based on the literature out there. Unfortunately, there is no health-based literature based on hourly values. So I do know that the EPA has looked at that. I think they've gone down to as low as 3 hours at this point with just a few studies. But right now, the literature base is not there. It's based on a 24-hour midnight to midnight standard. So let's get into these and based on that midnight to midnight standard. Again, here is just for an example, one of the sensor maps that we have. This particular one's the purple air map. There's a nice amount of purple airs around the state. It's not on this map, but AEQ actually installed one at a school in Winslow, in a school in Holbrook to kind of fill this gap in on the map. So we do have purple areas that we do put out there. But you see, this nice map. LA, you can really see that they've got a ton of monitors. Again, great indicators of smoke, but what do you notice? There's a random high value here in Phoenix. All the other ones are in the 30s. This is double that. These ones with circles, those are indoor air quality monitors. So again, when you look at this map, make sure you understand the difference of an outdoor air quality monitor versus an indoor one, which is that dark circle. Again, just some things to keep in mind. But perhaps one of the biggest things when you're looking at any of these maps, no matter what product you're looking at, is the averaging time. So I'm going to give you an example. This is one monitor that was up in Idaho just last week. It's right here. It's reading 212. This is the AQI scale. So this is what the EPA has created. It's called the Air Quality Index. Essentially, it's telling you how bad the air is on a scale from 0 to 500. The bigger the number, the more or the worse the air quality is. The standard is right here. Anything at 101 AQI or higher would be above the federal health standard, is what you're looking at. Now, if you remember from a quiz, what is that federal health standard based on for 2.5? It's based on, I didn't know there'd be quizzes, huh? Midnight to midnight is what that is all based on. This is 212. You might pull up this map, and this is the default for this map. You think, oh, it's very unhealthy outside. But over here, you'll notice averaging time, it's marked to real time. These will give you real-time air quality measurements, instantaneous, essentially. These are hourly averages. Can you take a real-time PM 2.5 value and turn it into an AQI? I'll give you a hint. No, you cannot, because there is no science based on it. That's not how the AQI was created. So look at this. Let's change to the hourly value. So if you change the hourly, we get 105. Now we've dropped unhealthy for sensitive groups. Again, can we use an hourly average, just 1 hour, to determine an AQI? No. You guys are catching up. Now we go to 1 day. So essentially, the 24-hour average, we come out to moderate. Is that an official AQI? Yes. Yeah. So you can see we have very healthy, unhealthy for sensitive groups, and moderate. Okay. Now let me ask you this question first. Is there smoke here at this monitor at this time? Yeah. Should I probably limit my outdoor activity? Yeah, you should. So it's showing you that there's definitely smoke here. Is it very healthy based on the AQI scale? No, it actually came in at moderate. So that's why it's a good thing to use, again, as an indicator that, hey, there's smoke out there. And guess what? You'd probably see it as well, believe it or not. You'd probably smell it. If you're smelling smoke, you're breathing smoke. If you're sensitive, limit your outdoor activity. But it's crucial that you understand, based on the EPA thresholds, that a 66 here, and we wouldn't call this an exceedance, so to speak, because it's not a regulatory monitor, but a 66, if you saw that for a 1 day average, is below the health standard. So that means that if we approve a burn, it would be okay, because again, we're below that health standard, even if it was an actual monitor. So again, I know it's a lot of detail there. If you have any questions, reach out to us, but it's just a quick glimpse of how you can get different numbers just based on the settings that you're using. So what if there's not a monitor in your area? Or how do we understand the smoke that's moving around? There's a lot of different tools that we use. This is the burn that we went up to up on the Coconino, and you can actually see the smoke, but these are similar to the pictures that I was mentioning I'd get from Roy, from Aaron, from other people around the state, showing us exactly where their smoke is. We use a lot of web cameras. The Forest Service has got a lot of web cameras. They actually turn them towards the fires. This was one up in Flagstaff, a nice pile burn. Notice the smoke getting up and out, but you also notice the smoke back here. We can start to gauge where the smoke is, how much smoke is potentially there, even without a monitor. ADOT has a ton of cameras around the state. We use the ADOT cameras all the time to look at smoke. This is a big case where you see a lot of that smoke down in the drainage, and then it lifts out of the drainage and actually goes across the road there. So it's kind of cool to see. Satellite has been extremely useful. Satellite has gotten very, very powerful. We can see basically down to probably 10, 20, 30, 40 acres if it starts to burn. This is smoke during the day. It might be hard to see. But then at night, this picture is showing you all that smoke down in the drainages, and it lifts out. So we can actually see from satellite where that smoke is draining and potentially how much is there based on ground observations, photos, even online. We'll search photos, we'll call people in communities, call post offices, call fire stations to see what smoke they're experiencing. So there are a ton of ways that we can use these resources to figure out how much smoke is there versus putting a monitor on every single block. If there isn't a monitor in your area, you don't know what the smoke is, there is a really good tool that can be used, as long as, again, it's used right. This was actually developed by New Mexico. It's called the 5-3-1 rule. This works generally in lower humidity, and Roy mentioned it's called the desert. It's arid. It's normally dry here, so we don't normally have that problem. But essentially, if you pick your location, and we all have maps now, you can map out exactly how far it's been, or how far something is away from you. But if you cannot see past 5 miles, so you're standing at your house, you've picked a reference point, not just it's hazy, but you can't see past it, that's when, if you are sensitive to smoke, you should minimize your outdoor activity. When it gets down to 3 miles, again, not just hazy, but you can't see past 3 miles, that's when, if you are sensitive, you should stay indoors. Everyone should begin to limit their outdoor activity. And then if you can't see past a mile, which a mile is actually pretty small visibility when you actually look at it. Again, you can't see past a mile. That's when everyone should begin to stay indoors. So it's just a quick tool that you can use to kind of figure out what's happening in your particular community. And again, put your pictures on Facebook, Twitter, whatever social media outfit you want. And our social media team will also forward those to us so we can actually see that. One quick note of photos, and when you're doing this 5-3-1 rule, make sure your back's to the sun. If you're staring directly into the sun or at sunrise, what always happens? It looks way worse than it actually is. That sun has to come through all of that particulate matter in a much lower angle, so it's going to look a lot worse. Same thing if you wake up and you notice the humidity went up a little bit, those particles can swell and make it look a lot worse than it actually is. So that's just one of the keys that you can start to look at. So that was monitoring. Now we'll switch in, and I'm going to start this one, so I'll just introduce myself again. So the burn windows. We talked a lot about weather. We talked a lot about the prior landscapes, what's going on. So what about the burn windows? How does it look for this year coming up when we're looking at prescribed fire? Everyone has said it. Weather, climate, climate. Is weather changing? Is climate changing? How does that impact the burn windows? So want to show you this real quick. Again, I'm a climatologist, so I kind of nerd out about these, but I'll keep it brief, I promise. If you want to email me, we can talk for hours about this. But what I did is I took about 40 rain gauges around the state, the entire state of Arizona, and averaged them and give you a 20-year rolling average. That's this red line here. Since the mid-1990s to 2023, precipitation across the state has dropped by 2.68 inches. In fact, we bottomed out at about 11.14 inches in 2020, and then we went up just a little bit in 2023 to 11.43. This is obviously the big El Nino years if you lived in Arizona, and then we're starting to dry out. Are we at the bottom and we're going to start going back up? That's my hope. Will it actually happen? I don't know. That's brilliant. Not me. Temperatures, they're also going up. So again, this is taking about 38 weather stations across the state at all different elevations. We've seen an average statewide temperature from 1982 increase by 2.1 degrees. Big increase here in the 50s, 60s. We flattened out, and then we're starting to increase again to an average of 76 degrees in 2023. It's also getting windier, believe it or not. Now, there's not a lot of wind data. It only goes back to about 1995. But using about, I think it's 18 stations around the state, we see that we are seeing an increase in wind speeds. This is often attributed to, if you have dry storm systems move through, which there's been a lot recently, it's just dry, you get stronger winds because you just have a stronger system, you have more winds, you don't have any rain. So this kind of lines up nicely with the precip that we see. So it is getting drier, it's getting warmer, and it's getting windier. So then when we look at acres burned versus precipitation in October, so this is 2016 to 2023. These are the acres burned in Arizona from prescribed fire. This is obviously COVID in 2020, so there were 0 acres burned. These maps up here are showing you precip across the state. Less precip, more precip. What do you know? A lot of precip, not a lot of prescribed fire. Right? a lot of prescribed fire. Dry, a lot of prescribed fire. Wet, not as much prescribed fire. So weather does really tell us a nice story about what's happening for the fall months. Now, obviously, it's not all weather that Roy and Ron are talking about, but it's a big player when it comes to prescribed fire. So what's in store for this October, November, December? You guys can probably all, you don't even need to stand up here. It's going to be hot and it's going to be dry. But I have to officially say it, so I will. So with that, I will turn it back over to Ron to talk about the outlook for prescribed fire.
We're just talking about the Forest Service stuff.
Yes.
But before I start, I want to make sure if you are a sensor or monitor manufacturer, a doctor, Matt Tates, you can send your cease and desist directly to him.
Yes.
Doctor.
Thanks, Ron.
Matt Tates.
I didn't say they were bad.
So we kind of saw Matt's data. We looked at that and we kind of looked at this. This is the big question we get every year leading into the fall. What's the season going to look like? What's the outlook going to look like? How much are you guys going to burn? What are the projects going to be? Where are they going to be? How much smoke are you going to produce? All that. So generally, we don't have a crystal ball. And I already told you how much I trust meteorologists. So we kind of got to put all that together. And as we put that together, we look at years past and we look at what we've done in the past, where we need to go. So this is data for Arizona for just for the national forest. So you see in the year, fiscal year, and this is a little part that gets a little bit goofy. We're feds, we deal with fiscal years. States deal with calendar years. So Matt's data was all calendar years. I'm looking at the fiscal year. So fiscal year 24, you see the data that we did there, the acres that were accomplished for prescribed fire. This is roughly 161,000 acres. So 161,000 acres, we actually put up more, the most acres in October than we're on record. And I think also April and May. But it has to do with the weather. And it has to do with that, we go back, we talked about the priority landscapes and the strategy of being able to get in there when everything aligns, work with our partners, go across those jurisdictional lines and get acres done. So when it comes to what's the outlook going to look like? This was a good year for us. This was a good year. But when we look at ecologically, we look at the fire needs assessment, we didn't hit the mean of where we should be. So when you look at the statistical mean, we should be 377,000 acres total. That's total acres treated. So that includes wildfire, prescribed fire, and mechanical. So we were on the low end of that mean with our total. I think our totals this year, it was just over 323,000 total for the Forest Service treated. Again, that's including mechanical, wildfire, and prescribed fire. So what's the outlook look like? I wish I could stand up here and say every year it's going to look like this. And maybe we get more when everything aligns. Because that's what we have to do. Kind of a callback to the year 2050 and what we're looking at there. That is where the fire needs assessment says we need to be ecologically in Arizona. So if I could look at my magic ball and tell you, I would say hopefully 161,000 or more for this year. But that means a lot of stuff has to align. We have to have the funding. We have to have the resources. And a lot of collaboration. And a lot of working with Matt and our partners. And Brody. And Daniel. And everybody at DEQ. That's how this program was built. It was built on the communication that we have. And it may look like we don't take things serious or we joke around. It's because we deal with each other all the time. And there's a time to be serious. And then there's a time to not take yourself so seriously. And this is one of those things where we hit a good number. And through all of this, there weren't very many complaints. Could it have been better air quality wise? I think yes. It could. Could it have been better fuel wise? Yes. It could have been better. But the reality of it is that in these adapted ecosystems where they need fire, not only just fire, they need smoke. A lot of that best science available is now starting to lean towards smoke. Smoke is what releases some of that stuff to allow those forests to regenerate. Not just the fire, not just the heat from the fire, but smoke also. We need to get back to these areas. We have urban sprawl that we deal with. We have weather that we deal with. We have funding that we deal with. We have resources we deal with. All that together, we need to be in this ballpark. So the projected activity, fire needs assessment, 377,444. That's the mean. That's the statistical mean of where we need to hit if we're going to make a dent in the fire risk. If we're going to make a dent in that, we have to hit that every year. And once again, it's including wildfire, mechanical treatment, prescribed fire. Arizona, 320,000. That was the total there. 320,000. Now, ideally, on first entry, we would use mechanical treatment on every first entry we could. If everything was perfect. Roy hit on it, topography. Brody, Matt talked about topography. We got topography. We talked about funding. We talked about some of these areas. Ideally, we would get in and we would treat initially first entry with mechanical, but it's just not possible. It's just not possible. We use prescribed fire the most because we can treat at a landscape scale with what we have available to us. With the funding we receive, the resources we have available, and all these partnerships and everything we've built. So if we can stay close to that 150 to 160,000, we're right in that ballpark of where we need to be. So with the weather, we already have areas right now. We look at last year's October versus this year's October, and we see it looks similar, but we already have areas out of prescription. They're not going to come back into prescription until they get moisture. So some of that 160,000 we need to get to it's ticking away right now. We're losing it. So when that moisture comes back, starts bringing those areas back into prescription, then we're going to have to get out there with our partners. And we're going to have to get out, and we have to do it in the time of year that is the safest for the fuels, for our personnel, that we get out there and do it. And unfortunately, it falls when it's cooler. We had initial attacks yesterday where we were flying, and if you're watching any of the flight trackers, we had the DC-9s, the jets screaming into Arizona because we had initial attacks near Crown King, and these other areas. This is October. One of the things I kind of looked at, I've been here 20 years now. I started when I was a lot younger, and 20 years now, and I kind of look at it and I was like, Brody wasn't here back then. He doesn't know. But we used to have a set pile season. We used to have broadcast in the spring, piles in the fall. The north rim of the Grand Canyon used to shut down seasonally because of the snow. You couldn't travel over there. That's why they shut it down. For safety was because of the snow. We're not seeing that. We saw Matt's trends on his stuff. We are not seeing that. We did get moisture this year, but it was spotty. It was really spotty. And when it came, especially I live in Phoenix, downtown Phoenix, when it hit Sky Harbor, it hit a bunch, and it all seemed to be right at the airport because I didn't get any. I didn't get anything at my house. So we're dealing with that along with all the other barriers that we have. So if we're asked to project what this season is going to look like, I'm hopeful we can start trying to catch back up, but knowing already how many projects are already behind because of they're out of prescription, it's tough. We have fuel areas that are in extreme now because of the heat, because of this. So that's some of the things. We had a definite pile season. We had a definite broadcast. Not too long ago, we had broadcasts in October, the end of October. We said, wow, we got broadcasts at the end of October. We don't normally see that. Then we had broadcasts in November. We don't normally see that. Then we had broadcasts in December. We don't normally see that. There was a while back, it was a type 2 or type 1 incident in December with a wildfire. So this season, the seasons have changed and we have to adapt with that. We have to adapt. But as we get hotter, it helps us with smoke management in some ways because it gets the smoke up and out quicker. What we saw on the west in the Preacher fires, the heat didn't allow the smoke to get all the way into the drainages. Those are those things that we work with DEQ with. Those are the sciences that we look at when we look at the models. We're looking at where is that smoke going to go? Is it going to stay up off the ground or is it going to get into your house? If it gets into your house, is it going to be there for a week? Can we shorten it up? Can we get it so that smoke's only there for one night? We take all of that stuff into account. We take that into account on our own before we even send those requests to DEQ, which is a very unique process. No other state has the relationships between the burners and the regulatory agency as Arizona. Brody hit on it a little bit ago. DEQ is the only state in the United States that tracks the emissions coming off of their prescribed fire and have a complete inventory at the end of the year. None of the other states do that. And nowhere in any of these other states will you see burners sitting in the same room with the regulators talking about how they can get this stuff across. So,
Okay, from Department of Forestry and Fire Management, I've got a quote that I heard the other day, and it goes like this: where comparison begins, happiness ends. So we're not going to compare with anybody, but I want you to know that in my career with the Forest Service, at or about March, there used to be a moratorium on pile burning. There was no more pile burning. There was a reason for that. And that was because piles would hold heat for sometimes 60 and 90 days. And then when we hit our windy period in April and May, we had wildfires that came out of it. And we had those 2 years ago in New Mexico. And you saw the outcome of that, right? Okay. So when it gets to the October, November burn window, that is optimum. That is absolutely optimum. Now, this is an observation from just maybe an untrained eye. We have gotten to a point where in November and December, we're seeing fuel moistures or large fuel moistures sometimes dipping below what they were in June. Now that's great for combustion, and it's great for the way smoke comes off of the fuels, because you go from flaming to glowing combustion without much smoldering. But that's the advantage to these drier conditions. But the fact of the matter is that we're going to be working together. Right now, the state, I'm going to characterize the last couple of years, we burned somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 acres. That's nothing. That's nothing compared to where we ought to be. And we know that. We recognize that. So the desire is that we would build our capability and capacity with our cooperators, with our partners, to where we can embrace a program of 20 to 40,000 acres in the next several years. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for the presentations. We want to thank Roy, Ron, Brody, and Matt for coming and giving us those presentations tonight. We are going to go into the question and answer portion of our discussion tonight, and I wanted to just kind of speak with you a little bit about our approach. So what we want to have is questions that are kind of specific to the presentation that was given. If a previous speaker has asked a question, we would prefer to hear a new question, moving on to something else, so that we can consider that towards our processes and towards improving. Also, we're asking that So it sounds like what we're going to do here is we'll maybe take some questions that are in the room, because we do have folks that have showed up here tonight. We appreciate you coming. We do have a lot of folks that are online. So maybe we'll take 2 or 3. Do we have a sign-up sheet tonight?
Not a sign-up sheet, but I do have some questions written down.
Okay, great. So 2 or 3 maybe comments in the room, and then we're going to go to questions online. If you are speaking in the room, just out of respect for others that have questions that are online, if you can take 2 or 3 minutes. I think we are going to set up a panel here real quick. So if our speakers can come up here to the front, we'll kind of situate the chairs, and then we'll start into that portion of our meeting.
The light might be in your guys' eyes. If you want to stand, you
I
can.
think we can
but
get it off to the side. Thank you, Lynn. Okay, so do we have anybody in the room that has specific questions? Sir, what is your name?
I'm Dr. Vito Barbaskis. I'm local here, but I've been working more in California than I have locally.
Okay.
And I noticed at the start of the presentation, there was some sort of a little bit of gloominess. And I wanted to give you guys a perspective from California that I don't see, you know, I'm a pretty new resident there, but what I don't see that is a humongous problem in California is the a crazy development of the wooded regions that you know, somebody already mentioned the Paradise Fire, Butte County. Well, Butte County is a picture postcard villain of what shouldn't be happening. If you take an extremely lush forest and you insert little packages of people in their extremely flammable houses all over that county, it's not a question of, is your house gonna burn down? It's a question of, when is it gonna burn down? And so, you know, California is pretty strongly affected by, especially in the foothills of the Sierras, but a lot of other places in the state too, where the way has gone bonkers. And people basically find it either more attractive or more economical to move out of the big city and to go into one of those areas. But in terms of fire protection, it's untenable. And you know, what was also interesting is that I was just reading a little while back Roger Kennedy's book on the former director of National Park Service of what are the big problems. And this was a book that's like written 20 years ago or something like that now. It's a bit old. But what he was saying is, you know, do not move people into the fire zone. That's not a wise action. And so I think, you know, there's also the problems in Arizona, but just to give you a little bit of context, I think we can be grateful that, you know, if I drive from here to Flagstaff, or, you know, take a right turn and left turn somewhere, I do not run into these little packets of houses which cannot be protected in a wildfire. So you know, we can thank ourselves for some things in Arizona here, which we have a very unfortunate example of in California.
Okay, so Vito, what I hear you saying is that we don't have the development here in Arizona that maybe takes place in California and can cause some challenging circumstances.
Yeah, people are moving into Chandler and Gilbert, and fortunately not into the Ponderosa Forest.
Great, so this is a positive comment. Thank you so much.
Positive comment.
Did we have any other comments or questions here in the room? Okay, we got a quiet group. That's fine, not a problem. Thank you for coming, those of you that have come and then to listen. We did have some questions that were handed to Michelle, so thank you for sharing those. So the first one that we had, and then we'll go to those comments online and the questions that are online. It looks like we're working on bringing those up. So the first one is, will all this effort over 10 years, and Ron, I think this might be to you, just reading over it, be able to keep the Sonoran Desert from disappearing, or the high desert? Comment on that.
Well, that's one of the hopes. That's one of the hopes of the strategy. That's why they pulled the science together. That's why they looked at the things and why they're there. And that's what our goals are.
Okay.
our goals are definitely there.
Yeah, I can hear what you're saying is suppressing what might be more developed as far as a challenging situation if we don't do these things, right? Okay, excellent. The next one is, are prescribed burns ever used as credits, in quotes, for greenhouse gas abatement? And then a follow-up on that is, if yes, does the information have to be disclosed? So who might take that? Or the internet, huh?
I have never heard of them being used for credits. I've never heard of it.
Okay, so maybe the answer is no, is what I'm hearing.
I don't know if anybody in the room is the ones that. Yeah.
Okay,
Is that something we need to find an answer for?
What's the question again?
so the question is, are prescribed burns ever used as credits for greenhouse gas abatement? And maybe this is something that we
I
should,
don't
yeah,
believe so.
okay. And Daniel's our director of air quality, so that, it looks like it's something you might be writing down, maybe to look into.
We'll take a look, but I don't think so, no.
Okay,
All right.
thank you for the question. With the third one here is, with such large burn goals, what health and wellness surveys or outreach are in place to monitor public health impacts? Are there any surveys in place that you know of?
Surveys?
The question is, what health and wellness surveys or outreach are in place to monitor public health impacts?
Yeah, that's another one.
The one thing that I do think that happens is county Board of Health has been monitoring that closely with the medical field. And when we get into a scenario where we've got a conflict with the health providers and they're noticing certain symptoms, then we can look at what we're doing with prescribed fire and coordinate that information a little bit better.
Okay, well, and I'll add to that, and in some other areas where we're working on separate issues, one of these is in Cottonwood recently, we are working with DHS, getting the monitoring information that we have, siphoning it to them and then letting them comment on that, more so than us becoming public health representatives or commentators, if you will. So what you may want to do is, my card is here, I think we have some of the cards of the participants. You're always welcome to take those and reach out to us if you want follow-up information on them. So do we have online comments or questions?
Yes.
Where am I going for these? I'm sorry, we haven't quite done it this way. So is this them?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Read record number of prescribed burns planned. While realizing the benefits of the burns, does this mean the Verde Valley can expect smoky skies all fall? The heat is not broken. How can we enjoy outside? Any thoughts on that?
I think there's a couple of things to note is that from a prescribed fire standpoint, and I worked for the Forest Service for a while, but we have a lot of recreation that goes on, and we know that. A lot of hunting that goes on.
Yeah.
And we know that and acknowledge that. And some of the schools, they open the schools or close the schools and let the kids go deer hunting. They used to happen a lot when I was burning, which I think is a great thing. Well, that first weekend of deer season, there was a holdup on some of our prescribed fires. We actually said we're going to stop that opening weekend of deer season. I don't think that happens as prolifically anymore as it used to, and that may or may not be okay, because I think we're better at monitoring the weather and reducing the impacts.
Okay.
More. But as far as the volume of burning that's going to be done around the Verde Valley here, I would defer to the Forest Service on that.
You know, I'd like to add to that. And one of the things I would say is, we talked a little bit about the coordination stuff that we've done. And one of the things on the Forest Service side is we've policed ourselves more than we've ever been policed by outside entities.
Okay.
We've set up our own timers where we've looked and we've coordinated with our sister agencies or our neighboring forests. And we've decided, along with DEQ's input, on coordinating these airsheds. And we go and we'll purposely hold off projects so other projects can be done. And we have ourselves stopped projects, cleared out airsheds completely for over a week before we came back. And when you look at that Brody presented a little bit earlier about the things that they look at smoke dispersion. So when you look at that, some of that extra coordination and some of that stuff where we police ourselves, it's stuff that doesn't even show up on that part. And as the smoke coordinator, when I was liaison in Arizona, there was a lot of burns that would get submitted through me that never even made it to DEQ.
Okay.
And that's one of those things. And we've hit these things. Roy talked a little bit about the hunting season, special things that pop up where we'll say we're clearing out this airshed and this airshed will be cleared. So we pick and choose these different times. And so we pick and choose these things, not to continuously keep things up. And just the presence of smoke doesn't always mean it's a public health issue. There's a lot of times, especially one of the things we look at meteorologically is the mixing heights and where those mixing heights of those layers are. So the mixing height, that's the free air that's kind of moving over that you'll never breathe. So if you get something into that mixing height, it'll move out, it'll transport. A lot of those real pretty sunsets, that kind of stuff where you see the stuff up in the layers. I've presented in classes before where I kind of call it like a smoke lasagna. We have all these different layers going different ways, doing their own thing. But it doesn't mean they're gonna cause any public health issues. That's where the sensors, that's where the monitors, that's where we look at that stuff. We look at it really importantly on what time in the morning that smoke's gonna break. What time in the evening is that smoke gonna start draining? Is that smoke gonna have enough time to get up and out, punch those layers, get into those layers so that it won't come back down and cause public health issues?
And Ron, what I'm hearing you say kind of goes back to what you presented on where there has to be a lot of communication. It sounds like that's not only at the local level where Roy is talking about in the hunting, example, but also between different fire districts, right? So that sounds like a really important component. I think that this next one a little bit goes into that also. First of all, thank you for saying thank you at the end, very nice. Can the burns be coordinated and occur during the week as opposed to the weekends? Fall is when our residents as well as tourists look forward to outdoor activities and cannot do it, I'm assuming because of the burns. The smoke settles in the village of Oak Creek and Verde Valley. How can this be better coordinated? So a little bit going towards what you were saying, Ron. Today in RR News, I'm not getting that acronym. What is RR?
Red Rock newspaper.
Okay, thank you. I don't know the local newspaper. I should have known that. Red Rock News. It indicated there are 14 scheduled burns coming up from the different entities. Any comment on that? Ron, did you want to take that? Because it kind of goes with what you were saying, or?
I think it just goes back to what I said.
Okay.
And we have tried to be as transparent as possible on our plans, on our burns coming up. And that's one of the things. We've kind of taken it from every level. We've taken it where we've had forests put their schedule into the water bill. Because in some places, they don't read certain publications or they don't listen to certain radio stations. Or so we've found and tried to find ways to get those put out. But those are scheduled plans. Those are our scheduled plans.
Okay.
That means there's a lot of stuff that has to go through. A lot of things have to line up just right before we go out and put any fire to the ground on those. And a lot of that coordination is done. And we've done it on those days. And we look a lot into that on what the weekend's gonna look like. Okay. We take a lot of thought and planning into what we're gonna do when we do these projects. And it's not like we can just go out and burn and burn and burn and burn and burn and burn and burn. It seems like that.
Right.
There seems to be that psychological side of that for some people. And we understand that.
That's just constantly smoking.
Yeah, and that's then that's an impact. That's an impact to public health.
Right.
And we recognize that. We recognize not only the air quality, not only what people are breathing in, but also what they're thinking when they want to recreate. So a lot of that is taken into account when we do these. And there seems to be a thought that we hit a record month of October last year. We hit a record April and May. And that's the unrecorded history within DEQ's database. If we go back to the 90s, 160,000, we did a lot more than that. Those acres back then were a lot more. And there were a lot of, and that's where we had those set acres where burning was every day. And we had issues. And we've gone through, this is a cyclical kind of thing when we do our planning. Is back then, they would burn 5 to 15 acres as soon as fall came all the way through. And then the buildup of smoke over time became an issue. We realized that wasn't the smartest way to do it. As more science came available, we looked at bigger plans. Bigger burns allowed us to control and actually use smoke management, manage the smoke, put science into the igniting patterns and getting smoke up and out of the area versus constantly putting things in there. So we're constantly mixing up, using that, and constantly using the best science available to come up with this, along with working with meteorologists. We have our own meteorologists, Forest Service have our own meteorologists that were part of putting all this together. Is we brought on a meteorologist that is in the region that can help out when we're doing these plannings and trying to get closer to those burn days.
I think it's important to acknowledge too that the perception, what Matt presented in the warming and getting drier. Today was one of those days that if you looked around the Verde Valley, it was very hazy all the way to the valley. And now that was more of a product of a squall line off of a thunder cell down on the end of the Bradshaws that when it gets drier, the environment is very friable and it's dusty. And it created that squall line right at dusk last night, created a heck of a boom coming out up through there, which then we got up this morning, and it's just opaque and hazy everywhere. Well, then the mixture of that information with the information of the fires at Crown King sets the perception of, oh, it was a fire.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Let's go to the next question here. Last year in October and November, Verde Valley had the worst smoke ever. Hard, if not dangerous to breathe. Theory was too many prescribed burns at once in totally calm wind days. How are you folks going to prevent this from happening again? In short, what will be done differently?
So I can start a stab at that. We'll start with the worst smoke ever. So we have there's the sensors that are out there. We had, again, 3 monitors out there. And none of them exceeded the actual midnight to midnight standard. So no doubt we are not discounting the fact that there was smoke in Verde Valley. Everyone will look at it. You live in Verde Valley. I mean, you live just around here. There was smoke there. And some mornings it was worse than others. But again, it lifts out during the day. It's more the perception of the smoke there. So there were multiple days of smoke. But again, as far as, what did you say? Dangerous to breathe?
Yeah.
Again, if you're smelling smoke, you are breathing smoke. If you are sensitive, you should limit your outdoor activity. But based on the EPA standards that are set, we did not see any values over that 35.5 from midnight to midnight. And that's what we have to use to regulate, because that is set by the EPA itself.
Okay. And then how are you folks going to prevent this from happening again? In short, what will be done different?
Were the burns in November?
Yeah, there were burns in November. Yeah, early November, yeah.
Early.
And did you think, though, when you look at this, and it kind of goes into the whole thing, the coordination part. You can go to smoke.ezdeq.gov, like Brody talked about, and you can see all the burns that are on there. Let's say there was one today for, I think, 2,000 some acres. We are constantly on the phone. I think that burn boss called me 3 times today to talk about what their smoke was doing, how they were going to burn it. You don't see that coordination, unfortunately, online. And even if, let's say, 2,500 acres approved, this happened last October, November, we can call them that day and they will even limit their burns based on the smoke that we're seeing. So again, if we see values high, that they can limit those within different blocks. So that's that relationship, that coordination that we can have between that. Just because a newspaper says they're going to burn 14 projects, 40,000 acres, and we may approve, 1,000 acres. That doesn't mean that that's exactly what's going to happen. There's a lot of coordination that happens behind the scenes, literally every hour, I would say, during a active. I'm constantly on the phone with Ron, constantly on the phone with Roy during these events.
What I hear you saying is that you're communicating with the proper entities so that, as you said, there may be 14 reported that's been approved, but if you're seeing those higher levels, you can step in and mitigate. Excuse me, got a frog in my throat. You can mitigate those higher levels by saying, hey, this is going to cause issues.
Yep.
Is that right?
And there's conditions that can be put on the burn. I mentioned the conditions that were on Aaron's burn. If a monitor is over 35.5, no more emissions can occur. Those are things that we can put on there. Same thing with I think there were some in October, November. Ignitions must be complete by 1 or 2 o'clock to allow time for that smoke to get up and out, and then it won't drain down as much. So there's a lot of stuff that happens behind the scenes that's not seen. So essentially, it might sound bad. It could have been a lot worse in October without all that coordination, the planning and everything that went into it. So,
I think there's a lot of coordination that goes on. There may be 14 projects out there, and those 14 projects are discussed as a means of rotating out to an area that is not as impacted.
Okay.
So that we can move and be a little more flexible.
So I think I can just add a little bit to that. One of the things that sticks out to me, last year, October, we had a lot of acres, a lot of conditions were good. There's a couple different things that you see, and when you look at Matt's map of the dryness and the heat of the weather, there's a couple different ways that fuels react when you get fire up. And when we look at, we talk about consumption, how much of the fuel is actually being burnt down. People can relate this to your bonfire. When you got a homecoming bonfire and you're throwing your cases of wood, or that's illegal because they're treated. But you're throwing natural woods out. And when you burn those, when you're done with the fire, you have that white ash at the very bottom. That means 100% of that wood was treated. It all consumed. So the emissions come off of that wood. And the emissions, if it consumes 100%, that means you had 100% of the emissions that were emitted out. What we've seen recently in Arizona is our fuels that historically took days, weeks, months to consume, in some instances have consumed an hour. So when we've treated these things, they've gone to white like a bonfire, and all those emissions were emitted. So where those emissions would have been emitted slowly over a month, 2 months time, it's all done in 2 hours. 2 hours and it is out. But when it burns that hot, it gets up and out. So when you go back to DEQ, what they look at when they approve, disapprove, and some of these things, one of the things that sticks out for me in October was we were approved on multiple burns for multiple thousands of acres broadcast before Halloween. There was nothing in the monitors. There was nothing in the weather. There was nothing there to say you guys shouldn't burn based off of the smoke evaluations. We looked into it, realized the only reason it clicked in my head is because my daughter was running around in her Halloween costume, that it's Halloween. And we said, oh man, we can't have this for Halloween. We policed ourselves. I called the guys and I said, look, what can we do here? We shut ourselves down. We shut ourselves down. We did not add any more smoke. And then right after that, rain came in and it went out of prescription. So there were projects that ended right there because we policed ourselves, that we didn't finish. And those are the things that we look at on a day-to-day basis. And we talk with DEQ and we talk with the burners and the people out in the field. And we are constantly looking at that stuff. Not because EPA says you have to, but because we understand the communities. And that's one of the other, I think, really important things is we live here.
Yeah.
We live here where we work. Our kids are trick or treating. Our kids are at homecoming. Our kids are out playing soccer. So I think that's really important to remember is we don't want to do this to our own kids.
Sure.
And these are treatments that we do, and we work on them in all this coordination, and we do the best we can with what we have available and what we've been handed through weather, through fuels, through urban sprawl, through whatever it is.
Okay.
We're out there doing that.
All right. We have 4 more questions to get through, and we have about 10 minutes. So I'm going to just rapid fire go through these. We can have short answers and one person answering if we can do that. And then we'll wrap up with Daniel giving us closing comments at the end. So how can residents be warned to stay indoors due to smoke health hazards, especially on weekends? And then good question there. Is there availability of ADEQ, taking reports over holidays or weekends? So Matt, maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah, as far as being warned, I think the number one, if we have a monitor in your area, their monitor is always available, phoenixviz.net. You can use the 531 rule. Again, use common sense. If you can't see a mile, limit your outdoor activity. If you're smelling smoke, stay indoors. As far as on the weekends, I have this phone with me 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Ron will call it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
So the answer to that is
So but one thing I do want to point out is to the public, this is a public meeting, we want your input as well. You can send us pictures. Send us pictures of what your experience is so we can see what smoke is out there. So that is one way that we can do that as well.
Okay, next question is the number of burns tied to budgets. In short, is there an incentive to do more burns to use up the budget?
The incentives are protect the forest, public health.
Okay,
That's the incentive.
okay. Enough said?
Yep.
Okay. When there are multiple prescribed burns planned on the Prescott National Forest, Coconino, kind of all on the same day, what criteria is used by ADEQ to approve or reject the burns? In other words, what is the trigger point ADEQ or points ADEQ uses to say the smoke impacts to a particular community is too much, so one or more burns must be canceled? So the way I read that is if we have 1, 2, 3, what is the criteria to say that's too much, let's do 1 or the 2 and not all 3?
Yeah, so we have internal stuff in place to where we want to be able to share the sheds with all the forests. And there are certain criteria to where if we have too many burn projects in a certain airshed, we think it's going to really fill it up with smoke. Then that is where we're going to have, like Matt has said, what we've all said, is all that coordination with the burners so that they can probably even shift days for their projects or burning windows in order to reduce the smoke impacts. Because, we want to share those airsheds. We don't want to have a bunch of burns going up really close to each other if we have those conditions to where we're expecting the heavier smoke impact. So the coordination is always there.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Brody. Question?
I could be wrong, but is DEQ also responsible for blasting and certain types of construction permits?
That would be a Daniel question.
So air quality permits, there are other air quality permits that we are issuing and responsible for.
But then would you also, before you offer a prescribed burn permit, look to see what is also going in with types of ADOT blasting or local municipality construction blasting?
So for the public, the question is, I'm just going to reiterate it so that they can hear it. You're a little quiet, that's totally fine. So if we're doing burns plus blasting at a local mine, for example, plus what was the other example? Oh, ADOT, right? Doing maybe over here on the I-17 going down.
Oak Creek Canyon.
Oak Creek Canyon, right? How is that coordinated, I guess is the question.
Short answer is it's not. I mean, I have never looked at it at blasting. I think that's a very local thing, and I have not talked with the blasting expert.
Yes, Sedona's a bowl that collects all of our decisions.
Yep.
So.
Okay, I like what you said.
But again, remember that PM10 will be captured in these as well. So you can, because there's smaller particles in 10 if you are blasting. So we would see an increase still on these monitors. So when if we were to put a condition on their barn that says 35.5, that monitor can't go over, even if there is something else happening that's impacting that monitor, they can't burn. So in a way, it is put it in. We are looking at the conditions, we're looking at the web camera stuff. And I do think, since it's the prescribed fire, I think sometimes, like Roy mentioned, we are quick to blame all the pollution in the Verde Valley on prescribed fire because it's the most visible thing. You saw that plume out there today. If it's hazy in the morning, you're going to automatically assume it's prescribed fire. So it is factored in a roundabout way. Directly, I don't know.
So what I'm hearing you say is if this says that, there is potentiality of saying, we're not going to do burning because of that.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you for that important question.
We can talk about it.
Yeah, and we are going to be back around a little bit after, so we can have some conversations. Last question here. During prescribed burns, is there ADEQ rep monitoring cameras, sensors, etc., 24/7 for excessive smoke? If they see it, how is the population warned? And if they're not warned, is what I'm understanding here, why?
So, go ahead.
Roy's got it.
This guy right here watches everything we do. And I can tell you that on one occasion, he called me on Monday morning and said, hey, you guys already burning up there? Because I'm seeing it. And this is way early in Monday morning. And I go, I don't think so. Let me look out my window. I look out my window and yay, barely. There's smoke coming off of the burn. And so, and it was a state burn. And so, is there somebody monitoring? I would say yes. There is.
You get pinged a lot is what I mean.
Well, there's a lot of this communication coordination going on.
Okay.
And
okay. Thank
yeah.
you.
And there's no fear of reprisal there either.
Yeah.
It's
just communication.
Yeah.
Is what I hear.
Back in the day, they say back in the day, we get it. When Ron first came on, it didn't have the technology, and they would get in an airplane.
Yeah.
Technology is way up there.
Okay, wonderful. We are going to go ahead and wrap. Thank you all for the questions. Thank you for being here tonight. We're going to have our Director of Air Quality from ADEQ, Daniel Chiglinski, close things up for us. Daniel, do you want the mic or are you good?
I think I'm good.
Okay.
I'll try to see close, that way we don't have to. Yes, exactly. So thank you. I really want to thank you all for coming out tonight. Really want to thank the community, Camp Verde Community Library for hosting this event. Really, without their hosting this, we would not be able to bring this to the community. Thank you to everyone online. Really appreciate the question. I thought those were pretty good questions, or excellent questions. And I thought this was an informative community meeting. That's what I'm thinking of, community meeting. I really want to thank the Arizona Department of Forest and Fire Management, our partners, the U.S. Forest Service, and the ADEQ team that made this happen. So thank you and good night.
Thank you all for attending.